The 14th century in Europe was an age shrouded in a perpetual twilight of fear and devastation. The world, as its people knew it, had been systematically dismantled by a series of cataclysms that challenged the very foundations of faith, society, and sanity. The most profound of these was the Black Death, a pestilence of almost biblical proportions that swept across the continent in a series of waves, beginning in 1347. Caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the plague did not merely kill, it eradicated. Historians estimate it wiped out between 25 and 50% of Europe's entire population, leaving a landscape scarred by mass graves and empty villages. The social and psychological fabric of medieval society was torn asunder. As the Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who witnessed the plague's wrath in Florence, recorded, "The terror was so absolute that it provoked two extreme reactions. Some became hyper-religious, locking themselves away in prayer and penance, while others abandoned all morality, deciding to drink freely, frequent places of public resort, and take their pleasure with song and revel in the face of certain doom." This atmosphere of apocalyptic dread was fertile ground for extreme forms of religious expression. One of the most striking was the rise of the flagellant movements. These were bands of people, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, who would march from town to town, their leaders preaching fiery sermons of repentance and the imminent end of days. At the peak of their fervor, they would engage in a ritual dance, strip to the waist, and publicly whip themselves with metal-tipped scourges until they bled, believing this self-mortification would atone for their sins and appease a wrathful God. The movement became so widespread and threatened the Church's authority that Pope Clement VI moved to prohibit it in 1348, but the genie of mass hysteria was already out of the bottle. Alongside this physical self-flagellation, a new and powerful artistic motif emerged from the collective trauma, the danse macabre, or dance of death. Appearing in frescoes, paintings, and literature from the 1420s onward, this allegory depicted death as a dancing skeleton, gleefully leading people from every station of life, emperor and pope, merchant and peasant, in a final, unavoidable procession to the grave. The earliest known depiction was a fresco in the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents in Paris, a bustling site where people from all walks of life would be confronted with this stark, satirical reminder of their mortality. It was a cultural obsession with the inevitability of death, a haunting visualization of the plague's indiscriminate harvest. It was against this backdrop of unhealed psychological wounds that another, more literal dance of death was about to begin. The region along the Rhine River, which would become the epicenter of the coming storm, had not been spared any suffering. The Black Death had ravaged its cities, and the years preceding 1374 were marked by further environmental and social catastrophes. Chronicles describe the Rhine rising to a devastating 34 feet, with floodwaters pouring over town walls and decomposing horses floating through the streets. Famine and widespread sickness followed the floods, pushing an already traumatized population to the very brink of endurance. The people were living in a state of constant low-grade terror, their minds primed for any explanation or outlet for their profound, collective despair. The stage was set not in a theater, but in the very real, struggling city of Aachen, and the performance that was about to unfold would be one of the most baffling and terrifying phenomena in human history. The people of the Rhine Valley were living on a knife's edge, shattered by plague, famine, and flood. They were searching for a salvation that never came. Instead, On the feast day of St. John the Baptist in 1374, they found a curse that made them dance. To uncover the first moments of the horror that seized the city of Aachen, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a moment of the chilling revelation.
The date was June 24th, 1374. In the Holy Roman Empire city of Aachen, a place known for its ancient history and imperial baths, the air should have been filled with the quiet reverence of the feast of St. John the Baptist. This holy day, which aligned with the pagan celebration of midsummer, was traditionally one of rest and worship. But on this day, the tranquility was shattered by an event that defied all contemporary understanding and continues to puzzle historians and scientists centuries later. It began not with a crowd, but with a handful of people, a dozen perhaps, who suddenly and without warning began to flail their limbs in the city's public spaces. Their movements were not those of a celebratory dance. They were described as haphazard, epileptic, and frantic. Some screamed, hooted, or cried out to God and Satan alike. Others seemed to be in a deep trance, their eyes unseeing, their bodies moving with a relentless, unnatural energy. What started as a disturbing curiosity quickly escalated into a full-blown epidemic. The compulsion was contagious, spreading through the gathered onlookers like a virus. Serfs and nobles, men and women, the old and the young, all social distinctions were erased as more and more townspeople were seized by the irresistible urge to join the frantic dance. They would take hands, forming giant, undulating circles, and spin round and round in ever-quickening loops. For hours and then days, they danced without rest, food, or water. Their bodies, pushed far beyond their limits, began to break down. The contemporary chronicler Justus Friedrich Karl Hecker described the spectacle. They formed circles, hand in hand, and appearing to have lost all control over their senses, continued dancing, regardless of the bystanders, for hours together, in wild delirium, until at length they fell to the ground in a state of exhaustion. When the sky finally darkened, some would disperse, but others would collapse where they danced. Historian H.C. Eric Middlefort notes in his work that some never rose again, succumbing to broken ribs, heart attacks, or sheer exhaustion. Yet with the dawn of the next day, the survivors would take up their macabre dance once more, as if driven by an invisible whip. The behavior of the afflicted went far beyond mere dancing. In an age of strict church domination, some of the unwilling revelers would strip naked and engage in sexual acts in the street. Others grunted and hopped around like animals. Many exhibited strange and violent reactions to sensory stimuli. They were said to be unable to perceive the color red, sometimes becoming violent upon seeing it, and they could not stand pointed shoes. In a bizarre contrast, some sufferers begged bystanders to hit the soles of their feet or to throw them high into the air. They screamed, laughed, cried, and sang, their faces contorted in what observers interpreted as both agony and ecstasy. They were a sight of profound contradiction. Their bodies moved with vigorous, rhythmic purpose, yet they screamed and begged for mercy and release from their own relentless motion. The city of Aachen had been transformed from a center of imperial dignity into a chaotic open-air asylum, its normal rhythms replaced by the pounding of countless fevered feet and the desperate cacophony of its possessed citizens. The city of Aachen was in the grip of a terrifying and inexplicable madness, but the horror was not content to remain within its walls. The dancing plague was a contagion of the mind and soul, and it was about to spread. carried along the same river routes that had brought both trade and the Black Death. To follow the path of the dancing mania as it infected town after town, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter. The dancing mania that had gripped Aachen did not simply burn itself out and fade away. After several weeks of relentless, grueling activity within the city, it began to metastasize. Like a pathogen finding new hosts, the phenomenon spread from Aachen to other towns and cities, primarily following the vital artery of the Rhine River. The mania flowed into Liège and Tondres in Belgium, north to Utrecht in the Netherlands, and to other major centers like Cologne and Strasbourg in Germany. All along the Rhine, the same terrifying spectacle repeated itself, tormenting unsuspecting communities and baffling local authorities who were utterly unprepared for a plague of dancing. The response from those in power was a mixture of panic, superstition, and desperate, often counterproductive remedies. The received wisdom, still fresh from the Black Death, was to quarantine and isolate the sick. However, this proved impossible when dealing with tens of thousands of aggressive, hysterical, and possibly violent people. With containment off the table, authorities turned to the prevailing beliefs of the time. The Church, holding immense sway over medieval life, saw the dancing not as an illness, but as a manifestation of demonic possession or a divine curse. Priests and monks performed mass exorcisms on the afflicted. In Liège, Belgium, some of the dancers were branded as heretics, dragged to churches, and subjected to brutal rituals designed to expel the devil. They were tied down and had holy water poured down their throats, were forced to vomit, or had scents literally slapped into them. One of the most common and paradoxically most disastrous responses was the use of music. Due to a belief that the right music could treat the mania, sometimes musicians were hired to play for the dancers. The tactic was to match the music to the frantic pace of the dance and then gradually slow the tempo, hoping the dancers would follow suit and calm down. In practice, this strategy almost always backfired spectacularly. The music, rather than curing the mania, often acted as a catalyst, encouraging more onlookers to join the frenzy and providing a powerful rhythmic soundtrack that drove the existing dancers to even greater heights of exertion. In some cases, the musicians were employed by the dancers themselves, who seemed compelled to fuel their own torment. The nature of the participants also added to the mystery. Research by sociologist Robert Bartholomew suggests that not all dancers were local townsfolk. Contemporary records indicate that participants often appeared to be outsiders, traveling from place to place in groups, with others joining them along the way. They were described as wearing strange, colorful attire and held wooden sticks, their customs and behavior seeming foreign and sinister to the local populations. Some chronicles referred to them as a curious sect or a strange sect, and their songs were said to utter the names of devils never heard of before. This has led to theories that the dancing mania may have been, at least in part, an organized form of manic religious pilgrimage or a ritual of a heretical sect, using the cover of a mass plague to engage in public displays that would otherwise be punishable by death. Whether they were a sect, a group of psychologically shattered pilgrims, or simply the first victims of a mass delusion, their journey along the Rhine ensured that the dancing plague would become a regional crisis, challenging the medical, religious, and civic authorities of every town it touched. The authorities were powerless, their cures only feeding the madness. As the dancing plague spread, it evolved, revealing new and even more bizarre behaviors. The search for a cause led down paths of superstition, biology, and the deepest fears of a traumatized society. What was the true nature of this affliction? To delve into the leading theories that attempt to explain this medieval mystery, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter. For centuries, the cause of the dancing mania of 1374 has remained an enigma, a historical puzzle that has generated a multitude of competing explanations. Modern scholars, armed with the tools of history, sociology, and medicine, have put forward several compelling theories, yet no single answer has achieved consensus. The true cause likely lies at the intersection of several of these factors, a perfect storm of biological, psychological, and social conditions that converged to create one of history's most bizarre phenomena. One of the most persistent biological theories is that of ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus, Claviceps purpurea, that grows on rye and other grains, particularly during wet periods. This theory is tantalizing because ergot contains alkaloids that are precursors to LSD, and ingestion can cause severe hallucinations, spasms, convulsions, and irrational behavior. The same mold has been controversially linked to the psychotic behavior that sparked the Salem witch trials. However, upon closer examination, the ergot theory possesses significant flaws. As researcher Robert E. Bartholomew points out, the outbreaks of dancing mania did not always occur in regions where rye was the primary crop, nor did they consistently align with the wet weather conditions necessary for the fungus to thrive. Furthermore, the symptoms of ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire, include gangrene and the painful constriction of blood flow to the extremities, often leading to the loss of limbs. These gruesome symptoms are notably absent from the contemporary descriptions of the dancing mania victims, who, while exhausted and injured, showed no signs of the characteristic tissue death associated with ergot. It is also difficult to imagine individuals with restricted, painful circulation dancing with relentless energy for days on end. A second theory moves away from a physical pathogen and instead posits a cultural or religious explanation. This view suggests the dancing mania was a carefully organized ritual, perhaps by a religious cult, performing a heretical ceremony. The fact that participants were often described as travelers and that their behavior was so out of step with medieval norms supports this idea. By presenting their actions as an involuntary plague, they could engage in ecstatic forbidden worship, which included stripping, sexual acts, and chanting the names of unfamiliar spirits, without facing immediate execution for heresy. The mania provided a shield of insanity, allowing for a temporary suspension of the era's strict social and religious codes. This theory is compelling, but it does not fully account for the sheer scale of the outbreaks, the genuine appearance of physical exhaustion and death, and the fact that many participants seemed to be in genuine, uncontrollable agony, begging for relief from their own bodies. The most widely accepted theory among modern scholars is that of mass psychogenic illness, or MPI, or mass hysteria. This is a powerful social phenomenon where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms in a group of people, spreading rapidly through social influence and shared anxiety. The key to this theory lies in the context. The communities affected by the dancing mania were under extreme, almost unimaginable stress. They were the same areas most severely impacted by the Black Death a generation earlier, and in the years immediately preceding 1374, they had suffered catastrophic flooding of the Rhine, followed by the inevitable famines and diseases. The people were desperate, impoverished, and living in a state of constant existential fear. Furthermore, the region held a potent folk belief, the legend that Saint Vitus, or in some cases the devil, had the power to curse sinners with an uncontrollable compulsion to dance. When a few individuals, cracked by the strain of their existence, began to dance, whether as a conscious ritual or a psychological break, the idea was infectious. Others, sharing the same beliefs and the same trauma, found themselves overcome by the same compulsion. Their dissociative trance states allowed them to push their bodies past normal limits, all within a cultural framework that provided both a cause
a curse, and a pattern of behavior for their shared suffering. In this light, the dancing mania was not a biological disease, but a catastrophic symptom of a society's collective broken mind. We have explored the theories, from fungus to faith, but the story of the dancing plagues does not end in the 14th century. The phenomenon would return, most famously in 16th century Strasbourg, and its echoes would reverberate through art, medicine, and culture for centuries. The final chapter of this madness is yet to come. To witness the legacy of the dancing plague and its shocking recurrence, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The dancing mania of 1374 was not an isolated event, but rather the most significant outbreak of a phenomenon that would recur in various forms for centuries. The most famous subsequent epidemic struck the city of Strasbourg in July 1518, an event that serves as a chilling postscript to the Aachen plague and provides further clues to the mania's nature. This outbreak began, as many legends do, with a single person. A woman named Frau Trophäa stepped into a narrow street and began to dance, alone and without music. She continued for 6 days until she was bloodied and bruised, at which point the authorities took her away to a holy shrine. But it was too late. Within days, 34 more people were struck by the same compulsion. The numbers swelled, eventually involving between 400 and 400 people dancing in a frenzied trance. The Strasbourg City Council's response, though well-intentioned, tragically echoed the failed strategies of the past. Believing the dancers needed to dance it out, they made a catastrophic decision. They cleared not one, but 2 guild halls for the dancers, built a massive wooden stage, and hired professional musicians and even strong dancers to keep the afflicted inspired and moving. This official endorsement and facilitation of the mania poured fuel on the fire. With a dedicated space and a constant musical accompaniment, the epidemic intensified. At its peak, one chronicler recorded that 15 people were dying every single day from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer exhaustion in the searing summer heat. Finally, the authorities realized their error. In an incredible U-turn, they banned music and dancing, and the victims were tied to wagons and forcibly taken on a pilgrimage to a remote shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, where the mania finally subsided. The legacy of the dancing plagues extends far beyond these strange historical episodes. The term Saint Vitus's dance was later adopted in the 19th century by the medical profession to describe a completely different condition, Sydenham's chorea, a neurological disorder characterized by rapid, uncoordinated jerking movements affecting the face, hands, and feet, often occurring in children after a streptococcal infection. This medical appropriation of the name, however, has caused confusion, as the symptoms of Sydenham's chorea, involuntary jerky twitches, are distinctly different from the coordinated, rhythmic dancing described in the medieval chronicles. In the realm of culture, the archetype of the dancing plague has proven endlessly fascinating. The danse macabre artistic tradition, which emerged in the plague's aftermath, remains a powerful cultural touchstone, its imagery of dancing skeletons explored by artists like Hans Holbein the Younger and referenced in modern productions from Saturday Night Live to off-Broadway plays. The story of the dancing mania itself has been the subject of numerous books, scholarly articles, and documentaries, often held up as the quintessential example of mass psychogenic illness. Some have even drawn parallels between the medieval mania and modern phenomena like raves, where participants also engage in freestyle dancing, sometimes to the point of physical exhaustion, often aided by hallucinogenic drugs. While the comparison is loose, It underscores the timeless human capacity for ecstatic, trance-like states achieved from rhythm and collective movement. The dancing plague, it seems, is not just a relic of the superstitious past, but a dark mirror reflecting the perennial and powerful connection between extreme psychological stress, social contagion, and the human body. The plague eventually faded, but the mystery remains, a ghost in the machine of human history. What final conclusions can we draw from this centuries-old tragedy? And what does it tell us about the power of the mind and the fragility of society under pressure? The final chapter seeks to bring this terrifying story to a close. To understand the ultimate meaning of the Dance of Death, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the final revealing installment.
The dancing mania that erupted in Aachen in 1374 and recurred across Europe for centuries represents one of history's most profound and unsettling mysteries. It was a real event, documented by physicians, monks, and city officials who were baffled by what they witnessed. Yet despite its historical reality, it resists a simple, singular explanation. The true cause of the dancing plague lies not in a single factor, but in a catastrophic convergence of multiple forces, a perfect storm of suffering that overwhelmed the human psyche of an entire region. The most compelling synthesis of the evidence points to mass psychogenic illness as the primary engine of the phenomenon, but this cannot be divorced from the crucial context that made such an outbreak possible. The MPI was not spontaneous. It was the result of a society already pushed to the breaking point. The Black Death had created a population suffering from what we would now recognize as widespread, untreated collective trauma. The subsequent environmental disasters, like the floods of the Rhine and the relentless famine and disease, created a backdrop of almost unbearable hardship and constant fear. Into this volatile mix stepped a potent cultural belief, the legend that a saint or the devil could curse people with a compulsive dance. This belief provided a script, a pattern of behavior for the community's shared distress. When the first individuals, broken by their circumstances, began to dance, whether as a heretical act, a desperate prayer, or a psychotic break, the idea was electrically transmissible. Others, sharing the same beliefs and the same trauma, found their own inhibitions dissolving, entering a dissociative state that allowed them to dance through pain and exhaustion, acting out a collective nightmare. This explanation does not require a fungus or a virus. It requires only a deep understanding of the power of the human mind under extreme duress. The people of the Rhine Valley were not merely dancing, they were externalizing an internal catastrophe. Their frantic movements were a physical manifestation of their terror, their loss, and their utter helplessness in the face of forces they could not control. In a world where death was a constant, omnipresent companion, the dancing mania was a perverse and tragic form of coping, a frenzy of life in the shadow of the grave, a desperate, embodied scream against the dying of the light. The story of the Aachen dancing plague endures because it is more than a historical curiosity. It is a stark lesson about the fragility of social order and the profound connection between mental and physical health. It reminds us that societal trauma can manifest in ways that seem irrational and bizarre to later observers, but were perfectly logical within the beleaguered worldview of those who lived it. The dancers of Aachen and Strasbourg were not simply victims of a curse or a disease. They were victims of their time, of a series of catastrophes that shattered their world and left them no outlet but a dance of death. Their story challenges us to look beyond simplistic explanations and to understand the deep, often hidden ways in which culture, psychology, and history intertwine to shape human behavior in the most extreme of circumstances.
The music has long since faded, and the dancers have turned to dust, but the echo of their frantic steps remains a haunting and permanent part of our human story. The story of the dancing plague of Aachen is a journey into the heart of a medieval mystery, a tale where history, psychology, and folklore collide to create one of the most chilling and inexplicable events of all time. It challenges our understanding of the past and forces us to confront the powerful and sometimes terrifying potential of the human mind. If you are drawn to the deepest enigmas of history, to the stories that linger at the edge of understanding, then your search for the unexplained continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the darkest corners of history and the human experience.